This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, this is a state that we've been following closely because of new egregiously gerrymandered maps by Republicans, and that's North Carolina. So that state has been sued again over its congressional and legislative maps, in addition to the lawsuit that your firm filed earlier this month. So how did these lawsuits differ from your lawsuit?
So this lawsuit is broader in that it involves not just the congressional lines, which is what the lawsuit that my firm filed does, but it also, as you point out, makes some really excellent points about the egregious and illegal maps that were drawn in the state legislature. So kudos to the folks who filed this lawsuit, and I look forward to seeing all of these cases move forward.
Well, is there any benefit to kind of joining together to create one lawsuit, or do you expect these suits to be consolidated in any way?
Yeah, I expect that almost certainly they will be, you use the correct legal term of art, so you've been hanging around me and Glenn for a long time. Consolidated, that's the term. In other words, they will remain separate lawsuits, but they will be essentially heard together. The discovery will go forward together. So there'll be a lot of efficiencies. You know, it's not really realistic to have everyone who may want to litigate a case just wait until everyone, we had an interest in litigating a congressional case on behalf of our clients. These organizations had an interest in that and other things. We were obviously on a much faster time frame. My firm tends to, one of the things I prioritize is bringing litigation fast, because I always am sensitive to the electoral calendar.
Right.
And, you don't want to deprive voting rights to voters or fair district to voters longer than you have to. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of cooperation as these cases move forward, and the courts will almost certainly hear them, together in some form or fashion.
Well, you mentioned the electoral calendar. Is there any way for this issue to be adjudicated before the 2024 election, or what's the timeline that you're expecting here?
Yeah, I don't expect these cases to be heard before 2024. Unfortunately, the lawsuit, Democracy Docket reported that the lawsuit that was filed by these other groups actually explicitly says that they're seeking relief for 2026. Our lawsuit didn't say that explicitly, but I think that that's probably the practical import, that we won't have relief for 2024, which is a real a tragedy for democracy. We sometimes talk in very abstract terms about, oh, will this case be heard in time for this election or that election? People talking about the effects of a voter suppression law. Will it be heard in time for 2024? It's a tragedy for voters. It's a tragedy for democracy when they are deprived their ability to vote, or they're going to vote under what are illegal districts and illegally racially gerrymandered districts. Black voters are going to pay the price when they have to vote under these districts in 2024. But I can promise them, and I can promise the Republicans in North Carolina, we're going to fight as hard as possible, as fast as possible, because I've beaten North Carolina before over their illegal maps, and we're going to beat them again.
Now, the resource that I've used, by the way, for anybody watching to follow along with this case and other voting rights cases is Democracy Docket. You've heard Mark mention it before. If you're not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, the link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. It's free. It's an amazing outlet, so definitely make sure to sign up. Mark, obviously the state Supreme Court in North Carolina is responsible for this mess after deciding to reverse their own ruling on a redistricting case after their new conservative justices were elected to the court. Can you speak on the makeup of the North Carolina Supreme Court now, and when the Democrats will next have the opportunity to retake that majority?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand how pernicious what Republicans have done in North Carolina, to actually be very precise. It used to be that the judges and justices in North Carolina were elected, and you could be a conservative or you could be a liberal, but you were elected on a nonpartisan basis. And when that was the case, it was a majority liberal court. The Republicans, when they took control of the legislature, mandated, ordered, forced judges on the state Supreme Court to run in partisan elections. So it is no longer the case that when we talk about the composition of the North Carolina Supreme Court, we're talking about liberal conservative. We are actually talking about Republicans and Democrats. So right now there are 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And that has changed the entire complexion of the court, not just in redistricting, but a whole host of areas, because it has forced judges that really were running maybe with ideological preferences. In Wisconsin, for example, when we talk about Justice Protasiewicz, who was elected, she was elected on a nonpartisan basis. She is undoubtedly a liberal, but she owes no fealty one way or another to a political party. She doesn't run as a Democrat. In North Carolina, the Republican legislature forced upon these justices running in partisan elections. So it's 5-2 Republican Democratic. In 2027, the North Carolina governor, who currently is a Democrat, and hopefully there'll be a new Democrat in that, will have the opportunity to replace a retiring Republican justice. So if it's a Democrat, you would then have if Democratic governor, you then have it go and become a 4-3. And then in 2028, 2 more Republican justices are up for election. And so we are looking at a majority Republican court at least until 2028. Hopefully, Democrats can retake it at that point. But this just goes to show how Republicans have really abused the state of North Carolina. You look at the gerrymandering of their legislature. It is a state that deserves all of the attention that you give to it.
Just a quick question on that, like a procedural question. How come the governor has the ability to replace a justice on the court, but then, the next year that there will be justices up for election?
Because they have a mandatory they have a retirement system for justices there, unlike in the U.S. Supreme Court. And so there's a Republican justice who will be retiring next year.
Okay.
And so in that vacancy year, that sort of short period, there'll be a gubernatorial appointment. And if it's a Democratic governor, it'll be a Democrat. If it's a Republican governor, presumably it'll be a Republican.
Got it. In the meantime, while North Carolina and other states have these state Supreme Courts where the conservative majorities don't seem to be too concerned with pro-democracy provisions in their state constitutions, what are Democrats' options to preserve democracy in these states?
File in federal court. Look, let me be clear. Sometimes people say, how come you're only filing in state court? Aren't these federal claims? You should be in federal court. And we get a lot of that nonsense with, Republicans being like, oh, you sued in state court. Well, North Carolina is a state, but all of the cases we've been talking about today have been filed in federal court. So the federal courts in North Carolina are like federal courts anywhere. There are judges appointed by both parties. The Fourth Circuit that sits on top of the North Carolina trial courts, the federal trial courts, is actually a majority Democratic appointed judges, which doesn't mean they're Democrats. That's who they were appointed by. So the federal courts are pretty good in North Carolina. Fourth Circuit's very good in North Carolina. So that's why you see a lot of litigation in North Carolina. And just a short history lesson for you, your audience, and the Republicans from North Carolina who may be watching this. In 2010, the North Carolina Republicans gerrymandered that map. In 2011, actually, they gerrymandered that map. And I filed a lawsuit in federal court, and that led to a overturning of that map in the U.S. Supreme Court. And as a result, they had to pass a new map. Then they tried to gerrymander again, and they lost in state court. Went up to the U.S. Supreme Court and lost before the U.S. Supreme Court when they thought they were going to win. And now they've done it again. The legislature there delayed passing these new maps to make it hard to get relief for 2024. But that's not going to stop these lawsuits. These lawsuits are going to go forward in 2026. I'm confident by then we will have rulings from the federal court. And so, we don't give up. We lament that we don't have relief for 2024, but I can promise the people of North Carolina, we're not going to stop fighting until there are fair maps in that state.
And let's finish off with this. Can you speak on kind of the doom loop it creates when Republicans have these majorities and then change the balance of the courts to then further perpetuate their majorities?
Yeah, look, I mean, we talk a lot about the authoritarian nature of Donald Trump and the Republican Party at the national level. But if you look at some of the actions and activities that we have seen at the state level, look at Wisconsin, where they threatened to impeach a state Supreme Court justice before she even ruled on anything.
Right.
In North Carolina, you have seen the state legislature gerrymander its own maps, change the way it elects judges, try to strip the governor's power to appoint people to things like the election board, try to change the composition of who runs elections in the states, undermine abortion rights in North Carolina, undermine voting rights in North Carolina. And it does become this self-fulfilling loop where they're able to gerrymander themselves into office. They're able to rig the election rules to make it harder to beat them, and people have voting rights. They change the way in which the courts are composed, and therefore the composition of the courts. At some point, you have to really you have to ask yourself, is Donald Trump really the outlier here? Or is Donald Trump really reflective of what we're seeing Ron DeSantis and Republicans doing at the state level there?
Right.
What you see Republicans doing at the state level in many, many states, including trying to do it in Wisconsin, trying to do it in North Carolina, and in Texas. I mean, you know, you and I have talked on other episodes about what Ken Paxton does in Texas. You know, there's a crisis of democracy in this country that is not just Donald Trump. It permeates from top to bottom in the Republican Party, and some of its worst manifestations are actually at the state and local level.
Yeah, perfectly put. And of course, for anybody watching, you can read about all of that on Democracy Docket. Again, the free news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting in elections. I'll put the link right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. If you're not yet signed up, please support Marc and his team by signing up. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.